to Politics Unusual. I'm Morgan McKay. We have a packed show, so let's jump right in. Up first, we're going to be joined by former New York Governor David Paterson, who's going to give us his take on the New York City mayor's race. Then we'll be joined by reporter David Brandt, who David's here, who's going to help explain why it might be easier to rent an affordable housing unit for the next year. And then we're going to listen to what people have to say about two bill proposals in New Jersey. But first, a few stories you might have missed. A new report from the Citizens Budget Commission shows that over the last 5 years, 30,000 New Yorkers have left the city and moved to Florida's Palm Beach and Miami-Dade County. They took with them a combined $9.2 billion in income. And it turns out 1 in 5 voters in New York City aren't registered with a political party. That's according to an analysis by the organization New York City Votes. So that means 1 in 5 New York City voters are unable to cast a ballot in primary elections since New York runs on a closed primary system. And speaking of voting, joining us now is former New York Governor David Paterson. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. I hope you are doing well. How is we were just chatting earlier. You are a talented musician. How are things going for you?
If you take out the word talented, then I could actually believe it. But I really didn't play any instruments, although I wanted to, until about during the pandemic is really when it started. And so we have a little band, we go around playing, and it's a lot of fun.
That's amazing. Well, I so value your insight, so thank you again so much for being here. So what are your thoughts so far on the mayor's race overall?
I hope you have more guests and more time to discuss things, because I'm going to make it real simple. Andrew Cuomo. Andrew Cuomo will be the next mayor of New York City. Andrew Cuomo has raised the money. Andrew Cuomo has an organization behind him that's left over from when he was governor. Andrew Cuomo has experience behind him since he was governor for 10 years. And Andrew Cuomo has raised $4 million, and the Campaign Finance Board is not challenging the money. Well, they did actually take some money away from him, but it will be nominal. Eric Adams, I think, is a victim of what I call piling on. When someone's been in a lot of trouble, it's easier to call them out. It's easy to deny funds from them. It's unfortunate, and I don't think it's really fair, but it's not going to affect the outcome of the primary. And then running as an independent, I know that Vincent Impellitteri did it in 1950, and I know that John Lindsay did it. I was 15 then in 1969. But John Lindsay was a Republican mayor who governed like a Democrat. And John Markey, who I would later serve in the New York State Senate, beat him in the primary in 1969. But Lindsay brought all the rest of the people in the city together. New York had become far more progressive in those days, and that's how he won. I don't see that happening for Mayor Adams, because if anything, he's gone the other way. He's been actually cooperating with the White House, and all these things I'm saying I don't disagree with, but they're not the kinds of activities that are going to get you reelected.
Yeah, former Governor Andrew Cuomo is by far leading the race right now. What are your thoughts on State Assemblyman Zohran Mamdani? Do you think he is doing well, considering?
I think that whatever you think of his point of view, he states his case very well. He's going all around the city. He's gotten himself into debates. And, you know, I wouldn't say I agree with everything he has to say, but he's challenging the system. And that's what America's all about. And I think he's doing it effectively. And I think he's pulled ahead of the other more activist candidates who are in the race with him.
Yes, he's definitely tried to make this a two-person race, at least. And he's a Democratic socialist. He does have some polarizing views. But we had him on the show the other day, and he had a few things to say about Cuomo. So I'm going to play the soundbite here and then get your take right after.
This is a governor who cut Medicaid. This is a governor who stole hundreds of millions of dollars from the MTA. This is a governor who's been credibly accused of, of sexual harassment by more than 10 women.
So what do you think about his accusations there?
Well, I think until there's some kind of investigation that, and there was an investigation run by the Attorney General's office that found him at fault on the issue with the harassment of the women, but there hasn't been any, no one has brought charges against him, has sustained it, the lawsuits against him. have mostly been dropped. And I'm not saying that these people are wrong, but I'm saying when you've been in a situation where you've been investigated and it had to be very embarrassing for the governor, he had to resign on August 10th of 2021. What I'm saying is, how long do you have to carry the cross? This is 4 years later now, and he's come back, and clearly the polls show that the public is forgiving him or looking the other way, but whichever way it is, it benefits him.
Do you feel like Cuomo has done enough to maybe apologize or own up to some of the alleged mistakes that people have accused him of committing?
You know, sometimes when people are accused of things, just the tension and the anxiety that produces, it's very difficult for some people to answer. And I find that when Governor Cuomo's asked about these things, that it would be a better way to answer the questions than the way he's been able to do it. And I think that's why the New York Post got so mad at him, and where he kind of doesn't address the issue. Sometimes you have to kind of get out there and take responsibility for something and say, this or that is my fault. Now, I did it so much that they asked me to stop taking the blame for things. On David Letterman's show, he said, this guy admits to everything. But the reality is, what I wanted to be, and the only way to be it is to tell the truth, is as authentic as possible, and where it's possible, maybe let the public know how you might have done things a little differently than before. But even with all of that discussion, Andrew Cuomo was still high up in the polls, and I think the polls are accurate, and I think he'll be the next mayor.
As you know, the Justice Department asked the judge overseeing Mayor Eric Adams' criminal case to drop the charges against him without prejudice, meaning those charges could be brought back at any point. But the Justice Department, the judge decided instead to drop the charges with prejudice, meaning that the case is over. But even the judge said there seemed like there was some sort of perception that there was a collusion between Adams and the Trump administration to get those charges dropped. Those are allegations that Adams has denied. But what's your take on this? Do you feel like you're satisfied with how this case was resolved?
Yes, I'm satisfied with how the case was resolved. I don't know why it took them so long. And also, I think what happened was right at the point that the new president coming in and asking for more of a crackdown on criminal immigrants or criminals who don't live here and need to be deported, Mayor Adams stepped forward and met them halfway. He and the Homeland Security Director, Tom Homan, get along very well, and they've done a very good job there. But at the same time, the administration has done some things to people that are absolutely outrageous. Anyone that has an opinion that isn't the same as theirs is subject to some kind of reprisal. And if you look through history from Oliver Cromwell to Frederick I and then Frederick the Great of Germany and Napoleon and Khrushchev and Castro, of all of these dictators, it always started with taking away rights from citizens. So I think that that's, an issue that we're going to have to think about as we move forward, because now you start hearing about some of the major companies talking about how they're going to have to raise prices. And I don't think the American public was expecting that when President Trump introduced the tariffs.
Well, I have a whole list of questions I didn't get to because I have so many other things to ask you as well, but we're out of time right now. I'm going to have you back on the show.
Well, thank you so much. It was good talking with you.
Thank you so much, Governor. I appreciate it. Coming up, a plan to fill thousands of empty affordable apartments. We're joined by a housing reporter, David Brand, who will break it all down for us. Welcome back. Finding an apartment in New York City is always tough, but for some, it just got a little easier. Starting on May 1st, qualified applicants can skip the housing lottery and apply to rent an affordable apartment on a first-come, first-served basis, but only for 1 year. Joining us now is housing reporter David Brand. You cover housing issues for WNYC and Gothamist. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So you just wrote a story about these affordable apartments. Explain more about how this is going to work.
Sure. So the city has tens of thousands of apartments available on the affordable housing lottery. You think of the brand new buildings going up on the Greenpoint waterfront or in the South Bronx or throughout much of Brooklyn and Queens. And a lot of those buildings have a quarter of their apartments reserved for middle income and low income renters. And the way people get into those is through the housing lottery. There's also a number of buildings that have been preserved in exchange for tax breaks or financing, low interest loans from the city. The owner of the building will keep a certain number of apartments reserved for low and middle income people, and the rents stabilized. People get into those as well through the housing lottery. The problem, a lot of these property owners and also people looking for apartments and housing groups say, is that once the initial tenant leaves, it takes a really long time to fill those apartments again. And so there's hundreds, potentially thousands of apartments that are just waiting for somebody to move in because the owner has to pick through the housing lottery. And that's been a very cumbersome, slow process. And so that's what the city has changed. They'll now allow people to apply directly or for the owners to list those apartments on a place like StreetEasy or another listing site.
So they're doing kind of like a revamp, right, to the lottery system. So this is only going to be a place for like a year. You can go on, look for an apartment. Is there something like this? I mean, are they looking at possibly making that permanent to just make it easier to fill these apartments? Because right now, everyone needs housing.
Right. I mean, that was the impetus for this, too. It's like they want to continue the lottery. It's about fairness, but also they're recognizing this is taking a really long time. We have a housing crisis. We have so many people in need of affordable units. We need to get people into these vacant apartments quickly. They say over this next year, they're going to be revamping the website, the Housing Connect lottery, to make it easier to use, to make it so that they can re-rent these empty apartments a lot faster. We'll see what they come up with, but they have a year to do it.
So sort of bad news for rent-stabilized apartments. The Rent Guidelines Board had a preliminary non-binding vote to raise the rent. What's been the reaction so far?
Well, the Rent Guidelines Board had this vote on Wednesday. Every year they first vote on a range of potential increases. And so this time around they voted on a range of 1.75% to 4.75% increase on one-year leases, and then 4.75 to 7.75 on two-year leases. A lot of tenants, a lot of politicians, a lot of candidates for mayor were saying the Rent Guidelines Board shouldn't raise rent at all. They should freeze rent because so many tenants are struggling. So the reaction has been, a lot of people say 7.75 for a two-year lease, that's way too high. It'll probably be, it's always somewhere in that range. It often is at the lower end of that range. So we could be looking at a 2.5 or 3% increase for next year. And, that'll be okay for a lot of people. They can handle it. A lot of tenants, that'll be a challenge. And then property owners, for them, a lot of property owners want more money, they want more profits, they want more money to invest in their buildings. Others are doing fine.
So, as you know, I mean, there are a million reasons why rent is so high in New York City, both for, tenants, and prices are also increasing for landlords a little bit as well. I guess, are there any proposals out there right now that are looking to bring down the cost so that a one-bedroom apartment in Manhattan is no longer $4,500?
Yeah, wow. It's expensive, and that's like the median rent in Manhattan now. Think about a family looking for a 2 or 3 bedroom, spending, double that potentially. It's really I guess most basically a supply problem. New York City has a housing crisis. According to the most recent housing survey from the City Housing Agency, less than 1% of apartments priced below $2,400 a month are vacant. And then overall, it's only about 1.4% of apartments are empty and available to rent. So supply and a demand problem. Rents can stay high because supply is so limited. So there are obviously many proposals to increase housing development in all parts of the city. That was a big part of Mayor Adams' City of Yes plan to allow, modest development all throughout the city. All the candidates for mayor now are proposing pretty bold housing production goals so that we can get more supply, get more people into it. There's going to be, that's going to incentivize a lot of market rate apartments, a lot of more expensive apartments. There are proposals to add more affordable housing, and so that's going to come through city financing or state financing, low interest loans, or building on city property where the land costs are lower, because you need to lower the cost of development in order to have rents be lower for the lowest income people who are really the people most in need of housing.
Well, as City of Yes starts, I'm going to have you back here to help us understand how it's going. So I really appreciate you and look forward to continue to reading your work. I appreciate it.
Let's do it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Coming up next, New Jersey residents sounding off. We're taking the pulse of the people, finding out their thoughts on a range of topics from pumping your own gas to cell phones in schools. To a new segment we're calling Pulse of the People. We're going to travel to different communities across the tri-state and talk with people to get their opinions on some important political topics that are or may soon impact them. And we're beginning in New Jersey. We took a trip to Hoboken this weekend to find out what people thought about a potential statewide cell phone ban in schools across the Garden State. Governor Phil Murphy is backing a proposal for phone-free schools that would require all districts to develop policies that would effectively ban phones and other internet-connected tech during instructional time. It's a hot-button issue, and New York is poised to pass a similar ban. Here's what some New Jerseyans had to say.
Well, when I was in school, we weren't allowed to take out our cell phones. I know that has recently changed. I'm all for no cell phones in the classroom, personally.
I think that cell phones, we're out in Hoboken, and I think there's like a potential danger that could have if we're outside during the school day and we just don't have access to our phones.
I think perhaps to have like a policy where the kids put their cell phones in the locker in the early day. Maybe they could check them at lunch and then pick them up at the end of the day from their locker. But I think during the actual school day, they don't really need to have their phones, in my opinion. I think it's very disruptive.
Another issue top of minds for New Jersey residents, will they be able to finally pump their own gas? Right now, New Jersey is the only state in the U.S. where self-service is not an option, but that can soon change. State Senator John Bramnick proposed a bill that will allow all drivers to pump their own gas. So we wanted to find out what people thought about this.
Looking at the imbeciles that I see at the gas station, I have continually seen people drive off with the nozzle in the tank. So, of course, you're going to cause an explosion or a big problem at the gas station. So I believe that New Jerseyans are not capable at this point of pumping their own gas.
Sometimes it's faster if we're like on the move and we just want to do it quickly and get out of there. I love full service gas stations. My brother lives in Pennsylvania, and I won't pump my gas in Pennsylvania. I'll wait till I get to New Jersey, even if I'm on empty.
And we'll continue to check in with people across our area and get their thoughts on political topics that are impacting their communities. And we want to hear from you. If you have an opinion on these topics, scan the code on your screen. That's going to take you to our website, fox5ny.com, where you can type in your answer. Next up, we're going to test your knowledge of the tri-state region, so stay with us as we take a look at some political history. Now to this week in history. On April 30th, 1789, George Washington delivered his first inaugural address to a joint session of Congress. It took place inside Federal Hall in the nation's new capital, which was New York City at the time. Finally, tonight, we're going to be testing your knowledge. Last week, we asked you, where is the smallest piece of private property in New York City located? And when we say small, we really meant it. The answer, the West Village, and it's called the Hess Triangle, located at the corner of 7th Avenue and Christopher Street. The triangular plot is approximately 25.5 inches by 27.5 inches. A landlord named David Hess fought the city when it claimed eminent domain and demolished the buildings in the area in order to build the 7th Avenue subway line. However, the city missed a spot and the family chose to install this defiant mosaic in its place. Now, to this week's question, what arcade game was banned in New York City for 30 years? Don't Google the answer, but if you want to take a shot at it, go ahead and scan the code on your screen. That's going to take you to our website, fox5ny.com, where you can type in your answer, then check back here to see if you're right. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Morgan McKay. We look forward to having you back here next week.